She sat at the top floor of a glass building that touched the clouds. From that high up, the city looked small, almost unreal. People rushed below like tiny dots, chasing time and dreams just as she once did. Now she was the one everyone looked up to. The one who made the decisions. The one whose name was whispered with respect and sometimes fear. She was the CEO, the woman who had everything. But even with all the success, her office felt cold. The walls were white, the furniture perfect, the air too quiet. She had built a life where everything looked impressive, but deep down it didn't feel like living anymore. Her mornings started before the sun. Meetings filled her calendar and her phone never stopped buzzing. People spoke to her with politeness, but there was always distance in their voices. No one really talked to her. They reported to her, agreed with her, and obeyed her. She didn't blame them. She had trained them that way. Power had taught her that emotions were weakness, and weakness had no place at the top. Still, some nights when she returned to her huge apartment, she felt something she couldn't silence. Loneliness. It wasn't the kind that came from being alone. It was the kind that came from being surrounded by everyone, yet feeling unseen. One morning, her assistant walked in and handed her a report. "There's a delay at the new construction site," she said softly. "The project manager is asking for your approval to change the design." Without looking up, she replied, "Tell them to fix it within the budget. No changes." "The manager insists it's necessary," the assistant continued. "He said he'd like to speak with you directly." That sentence caught her attention. Most people avoided direct conversations with her. She looked up and raised a brow. "He wants to speak to me?" "Yes," the assistant replied. "He said he'll be here at 11. The CEO checked her watch. It was 10:30. "Fine," she said, hiding her irritation. "Let's hear what's so important." At 11 sharp, the door opened. A man stepped in, holding blueprints under his arm. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple shirt with rolled sleeves. There was dust on his hands, like he'd been working outside. He looked calm, not nervous, which was rare for anyone entering her office. "Good morning," he said in a steady tone. "I'm from the construction team. I wanted to explain why we need to adjust the foundation design." She gestured for him to continue, watching him carefully. He laid out the papers on her table and began explaining the problem. The soil structure, the drainage, the risk if they ignored it. His voice was firm, his words clear. He didn't use fancy terms to impress her, and he didn't soften his opinion to please her. At one point, she interrupted, "You do realize that changing the design increases the cost by nearly 15%? "Yes," he said simply. "But if you don't change it, you'll pay double that fixing it later. No hesitation. No apology. Just the truth." For a moment, she was silent. She wasn't used to people disagreeing with her so directly. Most employees tried to sound polite, careful, scared of losing their jobs. But this man didn't seem scared. He just cared about doing his work right. She leaned back and studied him. "What's your position again?" "Project manager," he replied. "But I also handle on-site supervision." She nodded slowly. "All right. You'll get the approval for the design change, but next time try not to surprise me at the last minute." He smiled slightly. "I'll do my best. But construction doesn't always follow schedules." She didn't show it, but that reply almost made her laugh. Almost. After he left, she found herself thinking about the meeting more than she expected. There was something refreshing about the way he spoke. Direct, honest, without trying to win her favor. He treated her like a person, not a position. That was rare. A few days later, she visited the construction site herself. It wasn't her usual routine, but she wanted to see the progress. The air smelled of cement and steel. Workers moved around with focus, and she walked through the site in her neatly pressed suit, drawing glances as she passed. When he saw her, he waved and came over. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, surprised but friendly. "I wanted to check the progress myself," she replied. He handed her a helmet. "Then you'll need this. Can't have the CEO getting hurt." For some reason, his casual tone made her smile. She took the helmet and followed him as he explained the updates. He spoke about the structure, the challenges, and even the small victories his team had made. She noticed how his eyes lit up when he talked about his work. There was passion in his words, not for power, not for approval, but for creating something that mattered. After a while, they stopped near the foundation area. He pointed at the deep trench and said, "This part right here, it's the base. If you build it weak, the whole thing collapses later. Same with people, I guess. She looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He shrugged. You can build a big life, but if the foundation isn't strong, peace, honesty, balance, it eventually breaks. His words stayed with her. Simple but real. That day when she returned to her car, she sat quietly before starting the engine. She thought about what he said and about foundations. Maybe that was her problem. She had built everything on ambition and pride, but never on peace or balance. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed often. Each time, their conversations grew a little longer. He would ask her things no one ever asked, like whether she still enjoyed her work or what made her smile when she wasn't in the office. She didn't know how to answer at first. No one had ever asked her something so personal in years. He had a way of making silence feel comfortable. There was no pressure, no hidden motive, just presence. He didn't flatter her, didn't treat her differently because of her title. If anything, he sometimes teased her lightly about how seriously she took everything. One afternoon, as they stood by the nearly finished framework, he said, "You know, you look different when you're not in a meeting." She raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Less guarded," he said. "Like someone who remembers how to breathe." She didn't reply, but his words made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. After that day, she found herself visiting the site more often than necessary. Sometimes she'd bring coffee for the team, pretending it was for morale. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She liked being there, away from the walls of her office, away from the endless reports. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the cranes, she stood alone, watching the sky turn orange. He came up beside her and said quietly, "Beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes," she replied softly. "I almost forgot skies could look like this." He glanced at her. "Maybe you just stopped looking." She turned toward him. "Maybe," she admitted. They stood there in silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt human again. Not the CEO, not the leader, just a woman standing beside someone who made her forget the weight she carried. Later that night, as she drove home, she caught herself smiling for no reason. Her mind went back to that dusty construction site, to his calm voice and easy laugh. She didn't know why, but something about him felt different. He didn't want anything from her. He wasn't impressed by her success, and that made her curious, maybe even a little drawn. Still, she tried to dismiss it. She reminded herself that she was a professional, that feelings could complicate everything. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the truth. For the first time in a very long time, someone had seen her not as a CEO, not as a title, but as a person. And that small, unexpected connection had already started to change something inside her. The weeks after that sunset felt different for her. Work continued as usual. Meetings, reports, deadlines. But something had quietly changed inside her. She started noticing small things she used to ignore. The sound of laughter in the hallway, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the warmth of sunlight through her office windows. It was as if life had softened around the edges. She didn't know if it was him or just the way he made her look at things differently. Maybe both. Her visits to the construction site became routine now. Every time she went, she told herself it was just to check progress, just part of her job. But deep down, she knew she wanted to see him again. There was something grounding about him. He didn't treat her like everyone else did. He didn't rush to please her or agree with everything she said. Instead, he spoke to her with calm honesty, like someone who didn't care about her title but cared about what was real. One day, she arrived at the site earlier than usual. Workers were still unpacking tools, and the place was filled with the faint sound of machines warming up. She spotted him standing near the framework, studying a drawing on a clipboard. When he saw her, he smiled. "You're early," he said. "I wanted to see the progress before the meeting," she replied, pretending to sound professional. He nodded. "Good timing. We just finished fixing the structure you approved." She walked beside him, their footsteps crunching on gravel. As they moved around, she noticed something different about how he worked. He didn't order people around. He guided them, explained things, even helped carry materials when needed. There was no pride in him, no distance. He led by example, not authority, something she silently admired. When he saw her watching, he said with a light laugh, "You look surprised." She smiled faintly. "Just not used to seeing someone in charge actually doing the heavy work." He shrugged. You can't lead people if you don't understand their effort. Titles don't mean much when the real work happens here. She looked at him for a moment, his words echoing in her mind. Titles don't mean much. Coming from anyone else, it might have sounded disrespectful, but from him, it sounded true. Later, they sat at a small wooden table to discuss progress. A cool breeze passed through the half-built walls, carrying the scent of concrete and rain. As he explained the new schedule, she found herself distracted, not by his words, but by the calmness in his voice. There was something comforting about it. He noticed her silence and asked, "You're not listening, are you?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I am," she said quickly. He grinned. "No, you're somewhere else. Probably thinking about work even while you're at work." His playful tone made her laugh softly. "You might be right." "Then let me guess," he said, leaning back slightly. "You're thinking about your next meeting, the one that's probably going to drain you again?" She stared at him for a second, then nodded. "You really do notice things, don't you?" "I notice what people try to hide," he replied. "You carry yourself like you're made of steel, but I can tell it's heavy." She didn't know what to say. No one ever spoke to her like that, and not so directly, not with such quiet understanding. Most people saw her as strong and untouchable, but he saw past that. "Do you ever get tired of being in control?" he asked gently. She took a deep breath. "Sometimes. But that's what the job needs. If I lose control, things fall apart." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe. Or maybe things could still work if you let people see a little more of the real you." His words felt like a mirror reflecting something she didn't want to face. She had built her whole identity around being composed and untouchable. To let someone see her real side felt risky, dangerous even. But he didn't push. He just smiled and changed the subject, talking about how one of the workers brought homemade lunch for everyone. The simplicity of it, people sharing food, laughing during a break, made her realize how different their worlds were. And for some reason, she found peace in that difference. Over the next few days, she found excuses to stay longer at the site. She'd help check reports or ask about small details she didn't really need to know. Sometimes, when he noticed her pretending to be busy, he'd just shake his head and say, "You don't have to act like you're here for work every time." She'd smile and reply, "And what should I say instead?" He'd grin. "Maybe that you just wanted some fresh air." They would both laugh, but deep inside she knew he wasn't wrong. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm hit while she was there. The workers ran for cover, and he quickly guided everyone to safety. She found herself standing under a half-built shelter, her clothes slightly damp, watching the rain hit the ground. He came over, dripping wet but smiling. "You could have stayed in your car," he said, "and missed this?" She replied, watching the rain fall. "It's peaceful." He stood beside her, looking at the sky. "Rain has a way of washing away noise," he said quietly. "Makes you realize how small we all are." She looked at him. "You say things like that a lot." "Deep things," he chuckled. "Not really. I just pay attention." For a moment, they stood in silence, the sound of rain surrounding them. It was strange how natural it felt, being next to him, saying nothing, just existing. Later that evening, when the rain stopped, she offered him a ride back into the city. He hesitated but agreed. During the drive, they talked about simple things, favorite places to eat, childhood memories, dreams. He told her he once wanted to travel the world but chose to stay and work near home so he could take care of his parents. There was no regret in his voice, only gratitude. "You seem content with simple things," she said. "Most people I know always want more," he smiled. "Maybe that's the problem. Wanting more doesn't always mean living better." His answer lingered in her mind long after she dropped him off. That night, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, thinking about everything he'd said. She realized how long it had been since she'd met someone who valued peace over power. It made her question everything, her choices, her habits, even her idea of success. The next morning, she woke up early, but instead of rushing to her office, she stopped by a small cafe near the site. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window with a notebook and coffee. He looked surprised to see her. "Didn't expect you here this early." "I thought I'd try a change of routine," she said, smiling. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Then join me, but you'll have to survive without your assistant or phone for 30 minutes. She laughed. "That sounds harder than you think." As they talked, she noticed how easy it was to be around him. There was no pressure, no expectation. He listened, really listened. And when he spoke, it was with sincerity. It had been so long since she'd felt that kind of connection. When she left the cafe that morning, something inside her felt lighter. She didn't know what this was, and friendship, admiration, or something deeper, but she knew it mattered. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew naturally. They shared moments that felt ordinary yet meaningful. Coffee breaks, long talks, shared laughter over small things. Every time she saw him, the walls she had built around her heart weakened a little more. But along with that warmth came confusion. She knew the world she lived in didn't forgive mistakes easily. People gossiped, judged, and exaggerated everything. The thought of anyone finding out she was close to someone from a lower rank in her company made her uneasy. Still, every time she tried to pull away, she found herself drawn back. He had a way of making her feel like herself again. Not the version everyone admired, but the one who existed quietly underneath. One evening, as they walked near the site after most workers had left, she asked softly, "Do you ever think two people from completely different worlds can really understand each other?" He looked at her, his expression calm. "If they're honest with each other, yes. Titles and worlds don't matter as much as people think." She nodded slowly. "I wish it were that simple." "It can be," he said gently. "You just have to stop letting fear make your decisions." His words struck deep. For years, fear had been her guide. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being seen as weak. But now, standing beside him, she wondered what it would be like to live without it. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized she hadn't just met someone different. She had met someone who made her question everything she thought she knew about success and power. He was teaching her something no business lesson ever could, that the most important things in life can't be controlled or measured. They can only be felt. And for the first time in years, she found herself falling asleep not thinking about work or goals, but about him, and the strange, peaceful warmth that came with remembering his voice. The days kept passing, but something about her routine had quietly changed. She still ran meetings, signed documents, and led with confidence, but now her mind often wandered, not to reports or deadlines, but to him. Sometimes during long conferences, she'd catch herself remembering the way he smiled, the sound of his voice when he talked about his work, or the calm in his eyes when everything around him was chaos. It made her heart feel strange, lighter but also restless. She didn't understand why this man, who lived such a simple life, occupied so much of her thoughts. He didn't belong to her world of polished offices and sharp suits, yet somehow he made her feel more alive than anyone she had ever known in it. One afternoon, after another tiring meeting, she decided to stop by the construction site again. She didn't have a reason, or maybe she didn't want to admit she just wanted to see him. When she arrived, she found him working with a few others, helping lift a heavy frame into place. Sweat covered his forehead, but he was smiling, encouraging the team, laughing with them. She stood at a distance, watching quietly. For years she had led through power and command, but he led through kindness and respect. People didn't just follow him, they trusted him. It was something she had never truly understood before. When he finally noticed her, he wiped his hands on a cloth and walked over. "Didn't expect to see you today," he said. "I needed a break from the office," she replied, pretending it was casual. He smiled knowingly. "You mean you escaped?" She laughed softly. "Maybe." They walked around the site together, checking the progress. As they moved through the half-built hallways, their shoulders brushed slightly, and for a brief second she felt a spark of warmth. She quickly stepped aside, hoping he didn't notice, but deep down, she wondered if he felt it too. They ended up sitting under a shade near the edge of the site, watching workers move like a rhythm, each one knowing what to do, each one part of something bigger. He handed her a bottle of water. "You should stay hydrated. The sun's not kind today." She took it and smiled. "You sound like you care." "I do," he said simply. "You may be the boss, but you're still human." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't flirtation, it was genuine concern. "Do you ever get tired of being the one who takes care of everyone else?" she asked after a pause. He leaned back, thinking. "Sometimes. But I think that's part of who I am. It feels right to help where I can." His answer was simple, but it touched her. She had spent years surrounded by people who cared about positions and recognition, but here was someone who cared without expecting anything in return. As the day went on, their conversations grew more personal. She found herself talking about her childhood, her struggles to prove herself, the loneliness that came with success. He listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he said softly, "It must have taken a lot to get where you are. But it sounds like you had to give up a lot too." She nodded slowly. "I did. I thought being successful would fill the emptiness, but it didn't. It just made it quieter." He looked at her with understanding. "Maybe you were chasing the wrong kind of success." His words hit her like a gentle truth she had been avoiding. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been chasing something that didn't really make her happy. As the sun began to set, they stood together, watching the golden light reflect on the unfinished building. It looked beautiful, even incomplete. Just like her life, she thought. Before leaving, he turned to her and said, "You know, you don't always have to be strong. Sometimes letting yourself be human is the real strength." Those words stayed with her long after she drove away. That night, as she sat by her window, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Not just the way he spoke, but how he made her feel. It had been years since anyone had looked at her without seeing her title first. He saw her, the person behind the power, and that was something rare. The next morning, she reached the office early. Her assistant noticed her calm mood and asked, "You seem different today. Something good happen?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just starting to see things differently." Later that week, she invited him to her company's appreciation event, a formal gathering meant to honor the staff. At first he refused, saying he wasn't comfortable in such settings, but she insisted gently, saying it wouldn't feel right without him there. When the evening came, he arrived in a simple suit. Nothing fancy, but he looked effortlessly confident. She noticed how different he seemed from the usual crowd, relaxed, grounded. While others mingled with fake smiles and polite compliments, he stood quietly observing, occasionally greeting people with genuine warmth. During the event, a few board members whispered when they saw him beside her. She caught some of their glances but ignored them. For the first time, she didn't care what anyone thought. At one point, while giving her speech, she paused, her eyes landing on him among the crowd. For a brief second, their gazes met and her voice softened. "Success means little if you forget the people who help you build it," she said, her words carrying a weight only he understood. After the event, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered around them. She turned to him and said quietly, "Thank you for coming." He smiled. "You didn't need me there, but I'm glad I came." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Did you notice how people looked at you tonight?" He chuckled lightly. "I did. But I've been looked at worse for less." She looked down, embarrassed. "I just don't want people to misunderstand." He nodded. "Then don't let their misunderstanding control your truth." His calmness amazed her. While she worried about reputation and image, he seemed free from it all. That freedom was something she secretly longed for. As they stood there, a gentle breeze passed between them. She wanted to say more. Something about how much he meant to her, how much he had changed the way she saw the world. But the words stayed trapped in her chest. She wasn't ready yet. In the days that followed, their bond grew deeper. They started sharing small pieces of their lives, morning messages, lunch breaks, and quiet talks after work. She found herself smiling more, laughing without thinking. Her employees even noticed how her temper had softened, how her tone had changed. One of her colleagues joked, "Whatever's making you this calm, don't lose it." She only smiled, knowing exactly what it was. One afternoon, she brought lunch for the team at the site. It was simple food, but the gesture surprised everyone. The workers cheered, saying it was the first time the company's CEO had ever done that. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because it felt right. Because she had learned from him that kindness mattered more than titles. He stood beside her, smiling quietly as the team enjoyed the meal. "You're changing," he said softly. "Is that a bad thing?" She asked. "No," he replied. "It's beautiful." Her heart skipped for a moment. There was something in his voice, gentle, sincere, that made her chest tighten. As they walked back together later, he said, "You know, I didn't expect we'd become this close." "Neither did I," she admitted. He looked at her for a moment and said, "Whatever this is, I hope you don't let fear ruin it." She met his eyes, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted to promise she wouldn't, but deep down she knew fear was still there, hiding behind her success, waiting to test her courage. That night, she couldn't sleep. She thought about everything and the laughter, the talks, the way he made her feel seen. For years, she had believed power was the only thing that could protect her. But now she was learning that love, pure and simple, could heal her in ways power never could. She didn't know where this connection would lead, or what it would cost, but one thing was certain. Her heart had started to wake up again. And the man who taught her to see beyond titles was slowly becoming the reason she believed in life and in love, all over again. People in the office had begun to notice the change in her. The woman who used to walk through the halls with a cold expression now had a calm smile that confused everyone. She still ran meetings with confidence and authority, but there was something gentler in her tone. She listened more, laughed softly sometimes, and no one could understand what had caused the shift. It didn't take long for whispers to start. People love to talk when something doesn't fit their expectations. Some said she had finally found a secret mentor. Others joked that maybe she had fallen in love. When her driver once dropped her off near the construction site where the project manager worked, rumors turned into stories. Suddenly, her name was everywhere, not in news headlines, but in the quiet, gossipy corners of her company. One afternoon, while she was reviewing reports in her glass office, her assistant hesitated before speaking. "There's something you should know," the assistant said softly. "Some employees are talking. They think you and him might be close." She froze for a second, but then nodded calmly. "Let them talk," she said. But her calm voice hid a storm inside. She wasn't embarrassed about her feelings, and at least not with him. But she knew how the world worked. People saw everything through power and position. To them, love between a CEO and an employee was never just love. It was a scandal waiting to happen. That evening, she met him at the same place where they often talked after work, a quiet cafe far from the city's noise. He noticed she wasn't her usual self. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly and avoided his eyes. "Something's bothering you," he said quietly. She sighed. "People are talking about us, about me." He leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "Do you care what they say?" She looked up at him, frustration in her eyes. "Of course I care. You know how easily things can be twisted. They'll say you're using me to move up or that I'm being unprofessional. It could damage both of us." He smiled faintly, not out of arrogance, but reassurance. "I've heard worse things said about me. But I care about what you think, not them." His words were simple, but they struck her deeply. She wanted to believe that it didn't matter, that her feelings were stronger than the world's opinions. But she had worked too hard to build her reputation. She feared one rumor could undo years of effort. "I wish things were easier," she whispered. He looked at her with a kind expression. "Life doesn't get easier. We just decide what's worth the fight." She smiled faintly, though her heart felt heavy. Days turned into weeks and the whispers grew louder. Even board members started hinting at the situation. One morning during a meeting, one of them made a passing comment. "We should keep personal and professional matters separate, especially in leadership." His words were polite, but his tone was sharp. She understood the message behind it. After that meeting, she sat alone in her office, staring out the window. The city looked calm, but her mind was in chaos. She felt torn between two worlds, the one she had built with discipline and logic, and the one she had discovered with warmth and emotion. Later that evening, she drove to the construction site again. Though it was after hours, he was still there finishing up paperwork. When he saw her, he smiled gently. "You shouldn't be here this late." She walked closer, her eyes filled with frustration and sadness. "They're questioning my leadership now. Because of us." He set the papers aside and looked straight at her. "Then maybe it's time you ask yourself what really matters." She didn't answer. He stepped closer, his voice calm but steady. "You've built something incredible. You've earned every bit of respect you have. But if that respect depends on pretending you don't have a heart, is it really worth it?" His words hit her like a truth she'd been avoiding. She had spent years proving she was capable, that she could lead, that she didn't need anyone's help. But now she realized how lonely that strength had been. She had protected her image so fiercely that she had forgotten what it felt like to live freely. "I don't know if I can handle losing everything," she admitted. He nodded, understanding her fear. "I'm not asking you to lose anything. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself." There was silence between them. The sound of the wind brushed through the empty site, and the distant hum of traffic filled the space where words couldn't. For a long time, she said nothing. Then finally she whispered, "You make everything sound simple." He smiled. "That's because it is. People complicate love when they start adding rules to it." She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see an employee. She saw someone who made her feel seen without needing to impress anyone. Someone who didn't care about her title or power. He only cared about her as a person. That night she went home and sat in her quiet apartment. The city lights flickered outside her window, but her thoughts were louder than ever. She remembered all the time she had stayed late at work, convincing herself that success would fill the emptiness inside. But success had never held her hand, never asked how she was doing, never made her laugh after a stressful day. He did. The next morning, she walked into the office as usual, her posture firm and confident. But there was something different in her eyes, a quiet resolve. She knew people would continue to talk, but she also knew she couldn't keep running from her feelings. When she saw him later that week during a project review, their eyes met briefly. There was no secret smile, no obvious connection, just quiet understanding. They didn't need to explain anything. They both knew where they stood. However, the world around them wasn't done testing their strength. A few days later, a journalist somehow got wind of the story. A small article appeared online, hinting at a possible relationship between the company's CEO and a lower-level employee. It wasn't a big scandal, but it was enough to stir curiosity. Her PR team quickly tried to control it, but the article made her realize something. No matter how much she tried to hide, people would always find a reason to judge. That evening, she called him. Her voice was calm but heavy. "They're not going to stop," she said. "I know," he replied quietly. There was a pause, and then she said something he didn't expect. "I'm not going to hide anymore." He didn't respond right away, but she could hear the quiet pride in his silence. "Then you're finally being yourself," he said softly. From that day on, she didn't avoid him or act distant. They continued to work professionally, but she no longer carried the weight of guilt. When people whispered, she ignored them. When board members hinted, she stood her ground. She had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. Over time, the gossip began to fade. People moved on to other stories, as they always do. What remained was respect, not just for her as a CEO, but as a person who had the courage to live with honesty. And though she didn't say it out loud, she knew in her heart that he had been right all along. Life wasn't about titles or control. It was about finding someone who made you feel real again, someone who could stand beside you without bowing down to your power. That night, when they met again at their favorite cafe, she smiled at him with quiet confidence. "You know," she said, "I think I finally understand what you meant that day, about fighting for what's worth it." He smiled back. "And?" She leaned back in her chair, her eyes soft and peaceful. "You were worth it." He didn't reply, but the look in his eyes said everything. They sat there in comfortable silence, knowing that love, when it's true, doesn't need to be justified or explained. It just exists, quietly, powerfully, and without titles. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, she felt a quiet shift inside herself. The boardrooms, the high-pressure meetings, the constant decisions that had once defined her life, they were still there, but their weight seemed lighter. Her heart had begun to find its rhythm again, a rhythm that wasn't dictated by power or expectation, but by something far more human. She started noticing the little things she had long ignored, the laughter of strangers walking down the street, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the way sunlight danced on glass windows. It was as though life had opened up in colors she had forgotten existed, and at the center of this change was him, the man who never asked for her title or power, only her honesty. One afternoon, she decided to visit the construction site again. It had become a habit, though she told herself it was for work. When she arrived, he was there, guiding a group of workers, smiling as he corrected small mistakes and offered encouragement. He looked up as she approached, and his face lit with a warmth that made her chest tighten. "You're here early," he said, his voice calm but teasing. "I wanted to see how everything's going," she replied, smiling softly. He shook his head lightly. "You always have a reason to come. I think you enjoy the distraction more than the work." She laughed, a sound that felt lighter than it had in years. "Maybe I do." They walked side by side through the site, observing the progress and talking about mundane things, tools, schedules, small victories. But beneath the casual conversation there was an unspoken connection, a sense that they had found a rhythm together. Every glance, every slight touch of their shoulders carried the comfort of shared understanding. As they paused near the edge of the site, the sun was beginning its descent, casting golden light over the half-built structure. He turned to her, eyes calm and serious. "I've been meaning to ask," he said softly. "Are you truly happy now?" She looked at him, considering the question. For years, happiness had been something she chased like a distant dream, measured in achievements and recognition. But now she realized it wasn't about the accolades. It wasn't about being admired or respected. Happiness, she understood, was simpler than that. It was being seen, being understood, being free to feel without judgment. "I think I am," she admitted quietly, "because I've learned what matters." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And what matters?" "Being honest with myself," she said. "Being with people who see me, not just my title or my work. Being able to feel." Without fear, his eyes softened. "Then I'm glad I could remind you." They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the city far below and the faint sound of construction in the distance. She felt a weight lift from her chest, a peace she hadn't known for years. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not gossip, not power, not expectations. As weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They spent time together outside of work, exploring small corners of the city, sharing meals at quiet cafes, and discovering that joy often lived in simplicity. She realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about presence, understanding, and small acts of care repeated over time. One evening, they found themselves sitting on a bench near a park, where children played and flowers swayed in the gentle breeze. She watched a little girl chase a butterfly, laughing without restraint, and felt a pang of nostalgia for a childhood she had long buried beneath ambition. "You see that?" she asked, nodding toward the girl. He followed her gaze. "She's enjoying the moment. Why?" "Because I used to forget moments like this existed," she said softly. "I was always too busy planning, achieving, controlling. I forgot how to just be." He squeezed her hand gently. "And now?" "Now I'm learning," she said, smiling at him. "Learning that life is bigger than work, that love, kindness, and connection are stronger than titles and power." He smiled, his eyes reflecting pride and affection. "I'm glad you're finally seeing it." Their days became a mix of work and quiet companionship. She continued to lead her company with intelligence and authority, but now there was warmth in her leadership. Employees noticed the change in her demeanor, a softer voice, a willingness to listen, and genuine concern for their well-being. They admired her not just for her achievements, but for her humanity. One morning, after a particularly grueling week, she arrived at the construction site, feeling exhausted but happy. He was waiting for her, leaning against a pillar, his presence steady and calming. "You look tired," he said. "I am," she admitted, "but good tired, if that makes sense." He laughed lightly. "It does. It means you're alive, not just surviving." They walked together, discussing the progress of the project, the challenges ahead, and the small victories they had achieved. Even in mundane conversation, there was a sense of ease between them, a comfort that came from understanding one another deeply. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together on the edge of the construction site. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and flowers. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her own. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined life could feel like this." "Like what?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Peaceful, real, loved," she said. "I used to think happiness came from control, from success, from being the best at everything. But it doesn't. It comes from this and from being honest with yourself, from being with someone who sees you, really sees you." He kissed her forehead gently. "Then you finally found it." The months continued, each day filled with small joys and quiet moments of connection. They celebrated achievements together, supported each other through challenges, and discovered that love could exist without drama or expectation. It was simple, profound, and life-changing. One weekend, they decided to take a short trip to a small town by the sea. Walking along the shore, they felt the sand beneath their feet. listened to the waves crash against the rocks, and watched the sun set over the horizon. She realized that this was the kind of life she had been missing, one that didn't demand perfection, one that allowed her to breathe and feel fully. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, stopping to look at him. "All the time," he said, taking her hands in his. "But it's been worth it." "Worth it?" she echoed, smiling softly. "Yes," he said, "because we've learned to be ourselves, and that's more important than anything else." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had spent years chasing power, control, and success, only to discover that the real strength lay in vulnerability and honesty. She had learned that life, when shared with someone who truly sees you, was richer than any achievement could ever be. As the sky turned deep shades of purple and the stars began to appear, they sat together in quiet companionship. She felt a sense of contentment she had never known, a balance between ambition and heart, between responsibility and freedom. Returning home, she carried that peace with her. She still led her company with excellence, but now there was a new purpose behind her work. She wanted to create not just success, but meaning, and for herself, for her team, and for the life she shared with him. Years later, she would remember those days as the turning point, the time when she discovered that true happiness didn't come from recognition or achievement, but from love, connection, and the courage to be fully human. He had taught her that titles and power didn't define life's most important moments. Love didn't need permission, prestige, or approval. It only needed honesty, patience, and a willing heart, and she had given her heart willingly, knowing that in his presence she was seen, understood, and valued for exactly who she was. Not the CEO, not the title, not the power, just her, simply, beautifully, humanly. Together they moved forward, building a life full of laughter, support, and quiet moments that mattered more than any achievement. And every evening, when the sun dipped below the skyline, she would look at him and feel a gratitude deeper than words. Gratitude for love that didn't demand anything, for courage that made her whole, and for a life that finally felt real. Because in the end, she had learned the greatest lesson of all. The strongest foundations are not made of power or titles, but of trust, respect, and love that sees the heart, not the position. And with him by her side, she knew that life could finally be lived freely, fully, and beautifully.